being represented here. And this is Nyeleti HONWANA. She is going to be focusing on youth. She has the Black Youth Organization, and what your resume is already posted here, and it looks like you've lived just about everywhere around the world. So you certainly have an international cultural perspective on all of this. And thank you for being here and sharing.
Thank you so much. I wonder if I could just go ahead and share my screen as
Absolutely.
I think
Thank you.
All right, so if you would all just let me know if you're seeing the presentation up.
Absolutely,
Yes,
it's up.
Okay, and not with my notes, right?
That's all right, no problem. And we see entrepreneurship coming up, being interlaced with all these speeches, and that's wonderful.
Yes,
Jobs and
exactly.
businesses. Okay,
That's
back to you.
exactly what we'll be talking about today. Perfect. So thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation and for Watch Democracy Grow for really curating it. I'm really pleased to be here and to be a part of talking about young people, talking about employment, and specifically opportunities, right? And so just by way of quick introduction, I noticed that my bio, though it shows kind of what I do as what I call my day job at the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, I'll be speaking predominantly today as the co-founder of Global Black Youth, which is an organization that is dedicated to bringing together and convening the most innovative, disruptive, entrepreneurial, and creative young Black leaders. And so it's really the things that I want to touch on today are really talking about kind of opportunities and the kind of entrepreneurial spirit, right, that Malcolm and Frank have both touched upon of young people on the continent. And what I'd like to do is to examine a little bit some of the dominant narratives and discourses around employment and opportunity, and kind of question and push us to go a little bit beyond those dominant narratives that come up over and over about young Black people, about young Black people in the global South, and specifically about young Africans. And so those are dominant narratives of marginalization, of disenfranchisement, people who live in liminal and insecure spaces. And while that is, of course, part of the story, right, of young Africans, it's not the whole story. Young Africans are innovators, they're disruptors, they're reimagining technologies to fit their own and their society's needs, they're entrepreneurial, they're hustlers, right? Both in the formal and informal sector. And so in the face of COVID-19, they're relying on that same kind of mentality, that same kind of hustler spirit to kind of stem the impact of this pandemic. And so just by way of a bit of background, I thought I'd talk a little bit about Global Black Youth and situate kind of where my intervention is coming from. So as I mentioned, Global Black Youth convenes disruptive, innovative, entrepreneurial young Black leaders. By Black, we refer to continental Africans, Africans in the diaspora, Afro-descendants, and the wider Black diasporic community that exists all over the world, right? And that's, in the obvious places such as Latin America, the United States, Western and Eastern Europe, but also in the Middle East, right? In the Asia Pacific, we have Afro-Turks in our networks, Afro-Chinese, Afro-Pacific Islanders, and these are all people who are looking to kind of be a part of a global community. And so what we aim to do is really establish that global community of Black youth disruptors and bring visibility to their work, and specifically their achievements harnessing technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship, while also countering the kind of inequalities and inequities that they see within their communities and societies. And so by connecting those leaders in various sectors, we're trying to create this multi-sectoral kind of cross-regional collaboration and problem solving, and really putting an emphasis on South-South connections, those connections that were broken historically on purpose, right? So trying to rebuild and establish those. And then finally, it's creating this pipeline that leads from, talents and assets, which are these young Black leaders, to opportunities for advancement of Black youth and Black communities. And so fundamentally, Global Black Youth understands Black youth as an untapped global resource with valuable and otherwise unattainable knowledge and solutions to the most pressing issues that we face today. And it's really from that assets-based approach that we engage with young Black people, both on the continent and beyond. And so as we think about, COVID-19 on the continent and the long-term, short and long-term impacts of this pandemic, I mean, it's important to kind of go over a couple of things which Frank and Dr. Beach have already touched on, right? One is that according to the African CDC, there are just over 250,000 cases of COVID-19, right? But the majority of those cases are found in specific countries. This is not something that is yet continent-wide in the same way. So it's affecting countries such as South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, and Algeria differently, all countries who are seeing cases in the double digits, and South Africa, by far seeing the most cases and most rapid rise of cases, right? So given testing capacity and other limitations, the kind of overall number of infected is likely much greater than what is being reported. And so therefore, it's really imperative that countries on the continent use all assets at their disposal to combat further spread of the pandemic. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, as we've discussed. 70% of the population is below the age of 30, and there's an average age of 20. Right, so these are young people that are facing socioeconomic and political challenges. They stem from deficient education, from high rates of unemployment, and political marginalization. And yet, despite this, and as we've mentioned, many of them are savvy entrepreneurs. They're surviving and they're thriving in both the formal and informal economies. And so young people are dominating digital spaces, right? They're innovating, they're community organizers, they're people who create opportunities for themselves. And COVID-19 really offers us an opportunity to harness that creativity and that knowledge to help mitigate those short and long-term impacts of the virus. And so to kind of get into more specifics, I thought that I would present just a few examples of what it is that young people are doing and how widespread these kinds of interventions are. So in Burkina Faso, the National Youth Council established the Battalion 2020 against COVID-19. This is an initiative that's aimed at training and dispatching 1,500 young volunteers on health, sanitation, and social measures to prevent the spread of the virus. In Nigeria, Isaac Olufadewa and his organization Slum and Rural Health Initiative produced the hashtag Stop COVID-19 infographics. These came out in more than 60 local African languages, and they're infographics that are designed to help spread accurate information about the disease kind of across the continent. And the use of these local languages and the cultural translations that they're making with these messages are really resonating in ways that make sense to communities and enhance kind of accessibility to information and counter the misinformation and disinformation that we've seen spread across not only the African continent, but the world over as COVID has spread as well. And so through innovation entrepreneurship, we see new platforms also developing, right, that are dedicated to fighting COVID-19. And these, again, are being set up by young people across the continent. So in an effort to counter rampant misinformation in South Africa, 2 recent graduates from the University of Cape Town established the Corona app. This is a tool that centralizes information flow about the pandemic. In South Sudan, Nelson Kwaje, who's the director of the hashtag Defy Hate Now, launched the hashtag 211 Check Collective. This is a digital community of young people working in various fields who collaborate to fight misinformation and raise awareness on coronavirus prevention and protection. And again, these online digital platforms are inviting young people in the population in general to bring in ideas and share good practices in the combat to COVID-19, regardless of their skill set, right? So it's really bringing in a wide variety of young people who are kind of sitting idle, but know that they have all this creative and entrepreneurial energy to share with their societies. So in Uganda, the youth-led group Zetu Africa launched the hashtag Smarter Than Corona campaign. Right, so under the slogan of Our Challenges, Our Solutions, they bring people together from all sectors of society to share information and discuss solutions to problems caused by the COVID-19 outbreak. And this kind of voluntary multi-sectoral approach, as I mentioned, really invites young people to be part of the solution to a global pandemic in which those skill sets, whatever they may be, can be employed. So, you know, there's also been a move to ensure that young people are taking part in also kind of giving service provisions, right? One thing that we see is how they're organizing in digital spaces, how they're creating new platforms, new applications and things like that to be used. But there's also kind of young people who are actively involved in their communities that are doing service provision, that are thinking about long-term health
Thank you.
impacts, that are trying to mitigate these effects. And so kind of beyond creating that accessibility and sharing reliable information within their communities, young people in many countries have also taken an active role in providing, again, access to preventative health services and equipment. So just by way of a couple of examples, in Kenya, Victor Odhiambo, a young entrepreneur, and his colleagues from the Garden of Hope initiative raised money to set up a series of hand washing stations in Kibera and other slums in Nairobi. Volunteers will periodically refill these water tanks and soap dispensers and invite people to make use of the facilities. In Cameroon, young people from the local youth corner started a youth coalition against COVID-19, and their flagship initiative is the One Person, One Hand Sanitizer initiative. This is a rapid response lab that produces homemade hand sanitizer for free distribution to families and communities in need. The young team of biomedical professionals followed the World Health Organization directions, right? They put together the right mixture of hydrogen peroxide and glycerin and water to produce hand sanitizers. And they enlisted a number of young volunteers who signed up through an online volunteer form. And so along with producing and delivering their product, they also go into neighborhoods and disinfect public spaces. And to date, they've produced and dispensed over 7,000 bottles of hand sanitizer. And so this is really an example of young people taking the lead in the response to this pandemic. They're not waiting, right, to be called upon. They're starting these initiatives, they're leading these movements, and they're bringing on the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Youth to come and partner with them, given that they've already had so much success. Also, given the lack of social safety nets in most countries on the continent, young people have included support services and foodstuffs as part of their interventions. And so these initiatives, along with kind of showing leadership, also constitute strong expressions of social solidarity. So in Kenya, two young leaders, Wevin Muganda and Suhail Omar, co-founded Mutual Aid Kenya. And this is a grassroots disaster relief organization that is using community-based groups in Nairobi and Mombasa to identify at-risk households. So through digital fundraising campaigns, Mutual Aid Kenya then collects mobile money donations from ordinary Kenyans to buy and distribute food packages to these households. Right, and so these kinds of initiatives are also being organized on regional levels. And so one of the organizations that exists on the continent is the World Organization of the Scout Movement. And so the Scouts operate independently in different countries, and they're providing different services. So in Ghana, the Scouts of the Ashanti region teamed up with the international chicken restaurant, KFC, to provide hot meals and water to vulnerable families. In Cape Verde, the Scouts teamed up with the Red Cross, right, to supply relief items to disadvantaged families. In South Africa and Botswana, the Rover Scouts are running errands, they're doing grocery shopping, and running delivery services for families unable to leave their homes. And then in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Scouts is particularly looking out for young homeless children, providing them safe spaces and meals during this coronavirus pandemic. And so what these examples really show us is that there is tremendous energy and creativity as activists, as community organizers, as entrepreneurs, as innovators that are coming from young people, right? They're already engaging themselves independently of directives or waiting for government or other sectors of society to call upon them, right? They're either leading or joining civil society organizations, they're reaching out to the private sector, they're engaging with their communities and their societies. Especially in light of lockdown and other social and physical distancing measures, youth are not satisfied with being idle, right? Many are engaged and they're looking to contribute. And despite their challenges, this is a generation that's better educated than their parents, right? They've mastered and reinvented the internet and digital spaces to respond to their own contexts. And the instances that I've outlined are really only a small example of this. And so Africa's youth, is really an undervalued and underinvested in resource, right? It's often seen as apathetic or negatively disruptive, but I think it's critical in thinking about Africa's socioeconomic future and the long-term impacts of COVID-19 that we begin to engage with young people on the continent in the ways and through the mediums that they're using. Rather than adopting the dominant deficiency perspective, we really need to move to an asset-based approach to youth engagement in society and in Africa's workforce. And so, of course, while this pandemic will have devastating health and socioeconomic effects on the continent, it also highlights the myriad roles that young people can and must take in leading African societies. Acknowledging, of course, that as with all segments of a given population, they're not homogenous, they're not driven by the same aspirations, but there are many pockets of innovation, of creativity, of entrepreneurship that exist on the continent that must be engaged with and harnessed in order to effectively mitigate the socioeconomic and employment effects of COVID-19. And so with that, I will, if I have any time to yield, I will yield it. And thank you so much. And I look forward to continuing the conversation during the question and answer portion.
Well, I was just getting ready to tell you had 5 more minutes if you wanted to go on, but since you've yielded the floor, Alphonsus Nwandum is here with us. We have his bio. It's already been posted. And he's the chairman of the African Diaspora Coalition, North Carolina. And also he has his own consulting services. And welcome to the conference and welcome to this great body of guests and fellow